So our next speaker really needs no introduction from me. And about the only thing I can tell you about him that you may not know, now some of you did know that February 6th is the birthday of President Ronald Reagan. I don't think it's perhaps a coincidence that it is also the wedding anniversary of Governor Scott Walker and First Lady Jeanette Walker, one of the governor's many good decisions. It is my honor to welcome the governor of the state of Wisconsin, perhaps the most pro-business governor in the country, Scott Walker.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. What a great crowd. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks. Wow. That was a nice insight. It is actually started out the day in Wauwatosa. Toadette and I, of course, are from Wauwatosa, so we started out there. I'll see her in just a little bit for a wedding anniversary. We're 21, 21st anniversary, so tonight we can legally have a beer together. But we've had a great time, and I always tell folks I remember my wedding anniversary because it's Ronald Reagan's birthday, or if Tonette's in the room, I tell people I remember Ronald Reagan's birthday because it's my wedding anniversary. It was a coincidence, but a wonderful one as well. And so in addition to starting out the day right with my wife, I was at my hometown Chamber of Commerce, Wauwatosa. I had a breakfast this morning I spoke at, and then after that I went over to New Berlin, to one of their elementary schools, which just happened to be named after Ronald Reagan. So it was kind of fun talking to fifth graders about someone who was a great inspiration for me, that being our 40th president. And then I just came from Green Bay. I was there signing 8 different pieces of legislation to help improve providing resources and employment opportunities for people suffering from mental illness issues. And of course, I couldn't be happier to be here today. Now, of course, last year I talked, it was a little bit different than normal. The 2 years prior as your governor, I talked a lot about the rah-rah where the state's at. I'm going to talk a little bit more like that today. Last year I had a bit of a PowerPoint. I think I heard from the WMC staff that was probably the first time a governor's ever done a PowerPoint presentation, but I thought because of the details with our unique, and still unique today, a year later, proposal in terms of Medicaid and what to do with it in the state of Wisconsin, that we should go through the numbers and make the case. But today I want to talk more than just that specific program. I want to talk to you in a larger context about where the state's headed, where we've come from, and more importantly, where we're headed. In this town, you probably have talked a lot earlier. Over the last few weeks, we had some great news right about the time of our State of the State address. Almost $1 billion in surplus. Think about that. What a difference 3 years makes. When you think about 3 years ago at this time, I came in as your 45th governor. We inherited a $3.6 billion budget deficit. And today, we have nearly $1 billion in surplus. It's just a remarkable turnaround. And I got to tell you why it happened. Really 2 reasons. First and foremost, overwhelming reason you're a part of, and that is the economy got better. When we took office 3 years ago, working hand in hand with our statewide chamber and local chambers and many of the employers here in this room, we decided we had to take swift action. Because you see, when I was running for governor, it was pretty clear to me. The thing that I heard more often from people was that there were 2 crises in the state, economic and fiscal. And so from the day I took office, I didn't take my eye off the ball. I've been focused every day since on how do we fix the economic and fiscal crisis in the state. And so we did it right away. You remember, in fact, WMC staff helped us out tremendously, working hand in hand to make sure we represented the view of employers in the state as to what would best help us improve the economy. Because we understand that we don't create jobs in government. You create jobs. The people of the state create jobs. We can either create in a business environment, an environment for employers that's better or worse, positive or negative. And so we set out to make for a better environment for employers in the state, to create more jobs, to create more opportunity, to create more prosperity. We lowered the tax burden. Over the past 3 years, I'm proud to say that taxes have gone down by $1.5 billion. How about that as a contrast to Illinois, that in the first year raised taxes on businesses 46%, and individuals on some 67%. Or just last year when Minnesota switched, I should say, its legislative majorities. And so now the governor and the legislature are the same party, and they raised taxes in that state in their budget last year by $2 billion. In contrast, we cut taxes on employers, on individuals, on property in this state by $1.5 billion. We particularly targeted some of our core industries so that manufacturing and agriculture, two of our largest economic bases in the state, started out last year with the manufacturing and agriculture production tax credit that started in tax year 2013 and builds to 2016. By 2016, it's a 7.5% credit. That means it wipes out almost all of your taxable liability. Now, if you're a manufacturer, or you're in the agricultural field, or if you're a business that does work with either of those two industries, I would invite you to go out and tell others back in your community, back in your industry, back around the country as well, of the advantage, the competitive advantage now of doing business in the state, because we empower you to take the money you'd otherwise send to the state and reinvest it in new capital purchases, in new technologies, in new innovations, the very things we understand will help you put more people to work. You see, sometimes people in this town, and particularly in our nation's capital, forget. They just think all we need to do is tell you to create more jobs and wave a magic wand and suddenly it'll happen. But it takes capital investments. And so we understand the best way to help you create more jobs is to put more money back in your pocket. On top of that, we did property tax relief and income tax relief, and those things have started to pay off. We reined in the frivolous and out-of-control lawsuits. We were proud to say that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce honored our state after that first year as one of the best states in the country for passing aggressive lawsuit reform. We streamlined the regulatory process, so what we do enforce is more about common sense than it is about bureaucratic red tape. And we're not done yet. We're not done yet, but we still have taken tremendous steps forward in every department, from the DNR to Safety and Professional Services to DATCP and others. Every day we're trying to figure out how we can be more customer service focused, how we can be more friendly. I had an interesting question the other day from a reporter who said that some of the citations were down in the DNR. And they wanted to know what I thought about that. I said, it's great. I said, it's great. And they kind of looked at me like, what are you talking about? I said, it's great because our goal was, with agencies like the DNR, was not to be at the tail end when things have already happened, to be out front. We're still for high standards, for clean air, for clean land, for clean water. We want to protect public safety and public health in the state, but we understand that you do too. The employers and homeowners and landowners and property owners in this state, you want the same thing we want. So the best way to do that is to get out front and be proactive and have state agencies that actually get out and help you up front instead of waiting until something's happening afterwards. That's a much more effective process going forward. And so I said, that's great. I'd like to do the point where we didn't have any citations in the future, because we've been so aggressive with working with our employers and our property owners that we got ahead of the curve and avoided those things and found a way for a win-win to make sure we protected the resources we value. At the same time, we didn't stand in the way of economic prosperity. We have done that working together, but we're not done yet. And so I'm excited about where that's got us. The $911, almost $912 million in outright surplus we now have in our state is directly related to the fact that the economy's gotten better. We created a better environment. We created a better partnership. And now you, the employers of this state, big and small alike, are reacting to that and putting more people to work. And it's happened for all the right reasons. You see in this state, we have more people working. We have more employers hiring. And something you don't hear much about, we actually have personal income up in this state. In fact, last year alone, it went up by nearly 4.5%. That means not only are people working, on average, they're making more money than we did in the past. And in fact, the day after my State of the State address, we came out with our monthly job numbers. And through the end of the year, through December of 2013, our unemployment rate that was once 4 years ago at 9.2% has dropped to 6.2%, one of the most dramatic drops we've seen in recent memory. In fact, if you look at private sector job growth from April of last year through the end of the year, we had the largest growth in private sector jobs since 1994. We are making dramatic inroads going forward, and it's because of you taking advantage of the reforms we're trying to do in this capital to make it easier for employers in the state to put people back to work. That's a clear agenda. In fact, it's interesting. We looked at those unemployment numbers that Thursday, the day after the State of the State, and it's a stark contrast to what we see when the national unemployment numbers come out. Now, believe me, I'm happy that the national unemployment rate's going down, but unfortunately, oftentimes when I hear the economists talk about that, many of them say it's not just because unemployment's down, it's because nationally, in some parts of this country, people are just opting not to look anymore. It's chronic long-term unemployment where people have just given up on reentering the workforce. That's not what's happening here. Not only is unemployment down, employment is up, the number of people in the workforce is up. That means our unemployment is down for the right reasons. More people are working, and we're seeing it in some of our key industries. Year to year, in December of last year, the numbers we saw in that recent report showed that 13,100 new manufacturing jobs were created in the state of Wisconsin. That's one of the top 10 states in the country, not just for manufacturing jobs, but for new manufacturing jobs of any state in the country. That's a good sign for the future, because advanced manufacturing and agriculture have really driven our state's economy. They're going to be key indicators going forward. Now, on top of that, we want other new advances in healthcare and information technology, in other new emerging businesses in clean water technology. All those things are part of the things we're focused in on, and agencies like the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation are helping us hone in on those key areas. But overall, it's about creating that better business environment, better environment for employers of the state to put people to work. So it's really about a better economy, an improving economy, and economic recovery in this state that help build this surplus. The other parallel thing with that, not quite as important as the economy, but important nonetheless, has been we've done a better job of being good stewards of the taxpayers' money. We put in place budget reforms, long-term structural reforms that helped us not only balance our state budget, but our local government budgets as well. That's why we took a $3.6 billion deficit, and through the end of our two-year budget cycle last June, at that point, as of June 30th, we saw a $759 million surplus. It has grown since then, but it's not just that. It's a rainy day fund that has grown. In fact, even through the most recent changes, the difference between what I inherited the day I took over from Jim Doyle to where I was at just a few weeks ago was 165 times bigger when it comes to the rainy day fund. We have a pension system that's the only one in the country that's fully funded. We have a per capita debt and pension ratio. The levels of pension and debt in the state per capita are one of the lowest in the country, one of the best in the country. We've got a bond rating that continues to get positive outlooks from the bond rating agencies in Washington, or excuse me, in New York. We are a stark contrast to our neighbor to the south in Illinois. Of course, picking on Illinois is kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. It's almost too easy. They got a pension that's half funded, a bond rating that's the worst in the country. They had a deficit just like we did a couple years ago, and they saw fit to try and handle it by raising taxes. Not much longer after that, about a year or so later, they still had budget problems. They had to lay off thousands of public employees. They had to cut programs like Medicaid. They had to make other decisions about, now they're talking about raising taxes even more and putting in place a progressive income tax in that state. They have an unemployment rate that continues to hover just below 9%. They are a night and day difference from where they're at and where we're headed. They're an example of what going backwards would be like if we decided to make a change in the future. What we're doing is an example of what it takes to continue to march forward, and with your help, that's exactly what we're going to do now and in the years to come. Now, in a moment, I want to touch on what I believe, and hopefully what many of you share, is what we should do with that surplus. But before we get there, I want to touch on one more thing out there. Because when I look around this room, I see a lot of folks who are involved in chambers, and a lot of employers I've visited, a lot of folks who believe in the free market and free enterprise and more freedom and opportunity. And I want to tell you that one of the things I've heard as I've traveled this state repeatedly, particularly at advanced manufacturing sites, but it's not limited to that. I hear it at healthcare sites, I hear it at IT businesses and other small businesses as well, but particularly from manufacturing. What I've heard as your governor is that many of our employers in this state have positions open today, but they can't find enough skilled workers to fill them. In fact, on any given day, over the last couple months, if I were to call Reggie Newsom up, my Secretary of the Department of Workforce Development, and ask him, Reggie, tell me what the JobCenterWisconsin.com site is at right now. And that's a site that's literally, purely a voluntary portal by which we allow employers to list job openings. The last month or two, we've found there's almost 50,000 positions open in this state. Now, it's great that the unemployment rate that was once 9.2 is now 6.2%. But even at 6.2%, That still means there's too many of our friends and our neighbors, and in some cases family members, either looking for a job or looking for a better job. And yet, here we have some 50,000 or more. That's just our voluntary site, let alone all the other sites that do it for a living, trying to place people in the job openings. We've got that many job openings in this state. To me, what I found is frustrating and yet an opportunity is that we got to figure out a way to connect the dots. And so I'm not much of a big spender, as you can tell over the last couple of years. In fact, I'm not only that way at the office. Tonette would tell you over the last 25 years, I still pack basically the same lunch, 2 ham and cheese sandwiches on wheat bread with a little bit of mayo in a brown bag, and that's what I take to work. I still have the same 1999 Saturn with about 106,000 miles on it. Thankfully, I don't have to drive it quite so much myself anymore, but I drive it occasionally, as well as if I'm lucky when it's warmer, my Harley-Davidson Road King. But I still have that same old Saturn from the past. I still eat the same lunch. I like to think of myself as being frugal and predictable. Tonette just says I'm cheap and boring. But in any case, you know, I look at where we're at, and I said I don't like to spend a lot of money. But the one area where I made an exception, in particular, in this last budget, was in worker training. We put $100 million in this past budget that we're in right now, that we passed back in June, and I signed June 30th. We put $100 million in the worker training. Because I heard from employers like many of you in this room that not only do you have openings, but the more amazing thing to me is people who say, I have openings, and you know what? If I had any confidence I could consistently fill those openings, I could take on more business. I'd create more jobs. I'd put more people to work. To which I said, my gosh, we got to fill these positions. And so we've got Wisconsin Fast Forward, which we funded in the budget, which comes out in the next couple of weeks, which will provide customized direct worker training for employers that are looking to grow here, as well as others who might want to come here. It's a multi-week course. It's not a 2 or 3 or 4 year program. It's multi-week customized worker training, because we want to make sure if you want to grow, and the only thing that's a barrier to your growth is having enough trained workers, we're going to get them in as quickly and as aggressively as possible. It is a partnership between our employers, our technical colleges, our workforce investment boards, and our state. We're the funding source to make sure more of that can happen. But it doesn't stop there. We put more resources into our technical colleges to make sure that in advanced manufacturing, in IT, in healthcare, and other related fields that we can fill those positions. We created a new UW system, what's called the UW Flex Option, to help the many adult learners in our society who've had some college credit but don't have a college degree to come back after being in the workforce and not have to go on campus, but instead do a flex option where they can fill in positions like nursing or information technology or engineering, so we can fill those vital positions you're looking for. We even worked with our medical colleges, UW and the Medical College of Wisconsin, to say we desperately need primary care physicians in our rural parts, and we work with places like Marshfield, which is part of my introduction here today, and others to say we're going to expand residency programs and others so that we can have more primary care physicians in rural and underserved areas to make sure that from a multi-week to a 2-year to a 4-year to a graduate or a medical school program, we're going to fill in every one of those positions we need. Because I firmly believe, and I know Kurt Bauer said this in the past, I firmly believe this as well, the state that leads the way in worker training and workforce development will be the state that leads the way in the economic revival in this country. I want that state to be the great state of Wisconsin. And so to expand on that for just a moment, and I'll finish up with what I think we should do with the surplus. But before we get to the surplus, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, which has been doing a great job out in the front lines, which is working with our regional and our local economic development efforts, but as part of their budget last year, they set aside some resources that are now in the hands of the Joint Finance Committee. It's about $35 million. And we've got an aggressive marketing campaign out there in other parts, and we decided instead of spending more on that, we're going to take that $35 million and put it into 3 programs which I've introduced in my State of the State address. The first one is the most aggressive of the 3 is we're going to buy down the waiting list at any of our technical colleges anywhere across the state of Wisconsin and eliminate any and all waiting lists for any of our high-need areas in manufacturing, in IT, and healthcare, and other related fields. Because I don't want the barrier to any of you who are looking for employees to be that anyone is waiting to get any of those classes. So whether it's at Madison College or Nicolet College or Northeastern Wisconsin Technical College, whether it's at Chippewa or MATC or Western, anywhere around the state, I want to make sure there's no waiting list for those critical need positions that you need, not just to hire, but to open the door to creating more jobs and opportunity in the future. Secondly, along with that, I want to expand the program that many of our high schools and technical colleges have. You might remember the night of the State of the State. I introduced some young people, some high school seniors from 7 different school districts that partner with WCTC in a dual enrollment academy. They're young people who get credit for their high school graduation. At the same time, they get credit for their technical college education in areas that related to advanced manufacturing and information technology. We want to make sure that in that great partnerships, not only the technical colleges and the high schools, we have a number of our employers who partnered in so that these young people have job offers right when they graduate, a tremendous opportunity to expand, and it's particularly good. I'm excited have a home just nearby where WCTC is, just a little bit east of Milwaukee County, that in Lake Country, which is some of our wealthiest properties in the state, we have such an aggressive effort and such a full involvement of young people in our skilled trades. We need to have that all across the state. I want to have dual enrollment type options in every technical college district and as many school districts we can across the state of Wisconsin. Because I understand it's not just about the short term, about filling the immediate needs for positions, particularly again in manufacturing, but it's about the long haul, about showing you the reason you can grow in the state of Wisconsin, the reason we can attract others to come into this state is not just the business climate overall, but the fact that we can make a compelling argument that for the long haul, we have a steady supply of well-trained, well-prepared, hardworking, dedicated, Midwestern work ethic type people who can fill those positions. And part of that means these dual enrollment programs. Excuse me, but part of it is one thing else I'm going to ask for your help on. You see, it's not just eliminating those waiting lists. It's not just about these dual enrollment academies and offering more of these programs. Part of it's a mindset change. And particularly as I look around the room, any of you about my age, I've got 2 sons, 18 and 19. Both of them happen to be in college right now. But for any of you who've got sons and daughters still in high school and that, I need your help. You see, part of it's offering these programs where in our budget we put money in for as early as 6th grade to do academic career plans that start helping young people think about where their careers are and their interests are, program that into that so they start taking courses to get ready for that. We're doing these dual enrollment in our high schools. We're doing these other programs out there to provide incentives. We're changing the scholarship model so that our top performers in high school are eligible for scholarships, not just for a 4-year college education, but for a 2-year. But one of the biggest hurdles we still have is the perception about our skilled trades and about our technical colleges. And so one of the things I need your help on, as parents, as employers, as people who have an influence on opinion makers in your neighborhoods and your communities across the state, is I need your help in changing the mindset of what it means to have a technical college education. You see, as I said at the State of the State, we need to be at a place where we value our sons and daughters who choose to be high-skilled welders and machinists and tool and die operators just as much as we value those who choose to be doctors and lawyers in today's society, because each of those positions are vitally needed for a strong and vibrant economy. We need to make sure we do that. And I'll give you an example. One thing specifically you can do. There's a lot of things you can do, but I'll give you one example, one you can do. I mentioned this a week and a half ago at the Wisconsin Education Conference where there were school board members and superintendents and other professionals from across the state and talking about education. I said when my sons were in junior high, when my son Matthew is my oldest, is just a year apart, when Matthew was thinking about where to go to high school, they'd gone to public schools up until that point, but Matthew applied for and took the test to get into Marquette University High School, a great Catholic high school in Milwaukee. He got in, he took the admission test, got in, did the whole thing. In the end, we treated Marquette High and Wauwatosa East, where he ultimately went, the same. We treated them like we were interviewing to see which school was best for our son. Just like we did 4 years later when he looked at Marquette and Wisconsin and other schools in and outside of the state of Wisconsin. I don't know why sometimes we think it's so unusual when kids do it, when families do it for public schools, K through 12, because we do it all the time when our sons and daughters go to college. But we treated them both the same, and we treated it like an interview process. And like I said, in the end, for a number of reasons, Wauwatosa East was the right fit for both Matt and then the year later for Alex. But I still remember, and any of you who've got kids or grandkids who are about this age know, that if you look at the brochures that most of our school districts put out, what's one of the first things they list on their list of accomplishments? A percentage of how many kids have gone on to a 4-year college education. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I got one son at Marquette and one at Wisconsin. So if a young man or young woman wants a career that requires a 4-year college degree or more, go for it. I'm all for it. That's why I did a 2-year tuition freeze. As a proud parent of a son at UW, I'm pleased to death that tuition's froze for the next 2 years. I just wish I could make that apply to the Jesuits as well, and I'd really be set. God bless them. I'd be struck by lightning for joking about the Jesuits with the Pope being a Jesuit now. But when I think about that's great. But it almost gives an implication that we've heard too often in the past that the only way to have a successful career is a 4-year college degree. That's just not the case. I told my son's friends over the last few years, I said, it's great if that's what you want to do, but don't think you automatically have to do that. And usually the best way to get their attention is money. I said, manufacturing jobs on average pay 52% more than the average job in the state. 87% of manufacturing jobs have benefits compared to just 72% of all their jobs. Manufacturing has about double the retention rate out there. I said, now, if you're thinking about what kind of career you want and you're thinking about the cost of getting there, you look at a 2-year technical college degree and you're probably going to get out of school 2 to 3 years sooner. You're going to have a fraction of the student loan debt. And you're probably, in many cases, going to make $15,000 to $20,000 grand more than a lot of your friends who got a 4-year degree. Now, again, life's not all about money, but it's amazing how their eyes kind of light up when you say that, because somewhere along the way, mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or somebody they know made them think that there wasn't a legitimate career path if you chose to go to 2-year technical college, and that's just not true. And we need to remind people of that. So the one assignment I would give you is to go back and ask your school board members, ask your superintendent, ask the people who run your schools to say, there's nothing wrong with being proud about how many kids go into a 4-year, but why don't you include 2-year as well? Wouldn't it be nice to say if 95 or 98 or however many percentage it is of our sons and daughters that went through this high school went on to get a 2- or 4-year college degree? Because in each of those cases, we know that's the entree to a good career. And so we want to applaud that, but we shouldn't single one out or the other. So that's your assignment going forward. The third big thing we're doing with this $35 million is something where a few years ago I talked about our initiative, and we still have it in place, to help returning veterans, particularly those coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, be able to reenter the workforce. Because it's just, to me, unconscionable that any man or woman who served our country overseas would come back to this state and to this country and not be able to find gainful employment. So we're still aggressively pushing that through jobs fairs, through initiatives, through other things. Great employees. Don't do it just for the patriotic sense. Do it because they're well-trained, well-prepared employees out there. But in addition to that, in addition to the things we just talked about with skilled trades and helping you find more workers, I'm convinced that one of our bigger challenges going forward in the next couple of years is going to be finding enough workers, period. Because as the unemployment continues to drop, as more people enter the workforce, as in turn, as we help you fill those skilled positions, and then many of you, as you told me, not only fill those positions, but take on more work, which requires yet even more workers. And particularly, one of the things that's been largely overlooked the last few years because of the economy, and that is as many of our baby boom generation workers reach retirement, one of the things we've got to be mindful of in the next few years is we got a big gap. And so when I look at that gap, I say, as a chief executive, as any of you would with your companies, I got to take some pretty decisive action. And to me, I look around the state and I said, that means that anyone who is able, I got to find a way to get them in the workforce. Anyone who wants a job should be able to find a job. And one of the groups I specifically mentioned in our State of the State is helping employers like many of you here today, helping employers across the state identify the unique abilities that people have who are otherwise identified as being people with disabilities. The story I mentioned at the State of the State was a young woman I met a couple years ago, actually just over here at UW Hospital, through a program called Project Search, who was in a position through that program that allowed her to work as someone who sterilized surgical equipment. See, this was a perfect job for her. She has acute autism. And so she was more uniquely qualified to do that than just about anybody else out there. But it took that program, and it took an employer who was willing to look beyond what otherwise some would identify as a disability to see that her unique situation empowered her actually to be exceptional at that position. Now, that's not easy. But we need to have more employees. And I would dare say there's probably a lot of folks here who already fit that bill. But one of the other things I would ask is, we announced a new initiative called A Better Bottom Line, which, let me be clear, is not about charity. I'm not asking you to look to hire people with disabilities for a charitable purpose. What I want is a way for us to help you identify the unique abilities that individuals with developmental disabilities, with physical disabilities, and those suffering from mental illness in the state, the unique abilities that these individuals can offer to your company and organization, and do so in a way that adds value not just to them and their employment, but adds value to your organization. We do that. We do that. That will help us. Because to me, if I'm looking at the future employment shortage out there, I can't afford to have anybody on the sideline. And what we found is it works. Not just for small businesses. One of the examples I've given them late is Walgreens nationally has bought into this program. They're one of the champions out there, along with a lot of great companies here in Wisconsin. Obviously, we got a lot of Walgreens in this state, too. But they have, as an example, a distribution center where once they got over 50% of their employees who were people with disabilities, their productivity at that next year went up by 120%. So it's not about charity. It's about identifying the unique abilities of people and then plugging them in. And what they found, and what employers here at hospitals and distribution centers and other places I visit have told me, is that if you make the right placement, these are some of your most dependable, reliable employees who more often than not bring incredible joy not just to you and the organization, but to their fellow employees. And so I'd ask you to join me in looking at a better bottom line, and look at it not from a charitable standpoint, but from a standpoint of not just helping that employee, but helping your organization as well. So those are the big three things we're trying to do to build off of worker training and the things we've done in this budget. The thing I want to end with, though, is to tell you about this surplus. Now, we've got almost $1 billion in surplus. And so what we're proposing to do with that little over $900 million is to take about $100 million of that and set it aside into the rainy day fund. Because as I mentioned before, part of the reason why we're here is we've set the table for good fiscal management. We make good decisions. The bond rating agencies are giving us positive outlooks. We're in all the right positions. Our pension and debt ratios down. We're doing all the right things, but we want it to continue. And so with that deposit in the rainy day fund, we will literally be 7 times greater than the rainy day fund was ever at its peak before I took office. 7 times greater. So we set that money aside, and then we take roughly $800 million of the rest of that surplus, and we set it aside in a simple concept. We send it back to you, the hardworking taxpayers of this state. We take $400+ million of that and put it in the property tax relief. For a typical homeowner, that means more than $101 reduction, outright reduction in your property tax levy this December. Obviously, for employers here who have property, it means a whole lot more depending on the size of your property. But on a typical homeowner, that's more than $100. That'll be a reduction in the levy from one year to the next, not a reduction in the increase. That means by this December, the typical property tax levy in the state will actually be less in December of 2014 than it was in December of 2010. Now, when Charlie did that introduction before, I was thinking, I was here as a candidate back in 2009. If I'd said 5 years ago that the property tax levy in 2014 would be less than the property tax levy in 2010, I would have clapped and then said, there's no way he can do that. There's no way that could happen. It's just not possible, right? That's what it will be this December, if we pass our blueprint for prosperity, which will drive down property taxes in the state, which is good for employers, it's good for small businesses in particular, it's good for farmers, it's good for senior citizens, it's good for working families, it's good for Wisconsin. On top of that, we want to put out another $100 million into income tax relief. Now, last year in the budget, we did $650 million worth of income tax relief. We reduced the number of brackets. We put a tax rate reduction for everybody. So everyone here, everyone across the state who pays income taxes on this April's bill will see a reduction in your outright income taxes in the state, not just as individuals, but of course any of you who are LLCs or sub-S corps, or like most employers in the state pay individual, not corporate income taxes. Every one of you in that category will see an income tax reduction. I want to do something a little bit different with this $100 million this time. I want to put roughly $100 million in the income tax relief, but I want to target it. You see, because this recovery we talked about that helped us build this surplus is one we saw people all across the state do exceptionally well, and in turn the economy's humming, personal income's up. but I want to make sure there's one group of people that we don't leave behind. And that's the lowest income tax bracket in the state. So I'm going to put nearly $100 million targeted to the lowest income tax bracket. Because, see, I want a recovery where no one's left behind, and the best way to keep them going is put more money back in their hands. Not to give them more government programs, not to give them more government subsidies, but to say, let's lower your tax rate so you can use that money to get into the game, to get into the workforce, to start your own business if that's what you want to do, whatever it might be, we want to help. And then the third thing we're doing, it doesn't require any legislative action. Starting April 1st, we're going to put more than $320 million into withholding reform to adjust for the income tax cuts we've made and proposed to make for other changes as well. That means for a typical working family, mom and dad work, 2 kids, typical family in this state will see $57.90+ more in their paycheck per month. That means through the end of the year, more than $520 more that they'll see right back in their paycheck. That's real money. Those things together align for about $800 million. Now, as you can imagine, when I came out with this proposal, this blueprint for prosperity in our State of the State address, as you can imagine, there were some people in the Capitol that said, whoa, you can't do that. What they said is you got to keep more of the money in Madison. Now, I don't know about all of you, but last night when I was at the Menominee Chamber of Commerce, this morning when I was at the Wauwatosa Chamber of Commerce, when I go just about anywhere around the state, I got to tell you, not just recently, but over the last 3 years, I have a hard time hearing a whole lot of people say to me, Governor, we don't send enough money to Madison. I just don't hear that. I don't know if any of you hear it, but I don't hear it. Maybe they're telling me something different than they tell all of you, but I just don't hear people say, hey, Scott, the taxes in this state are too low. I don't even hear people say the taxes in the state are just right. What I hear time and time again from people across this state, whether they're individual taxpayers or employers like so many of you here in this room, what I hear time and time again is if you want to keep the economic recovery going, if you want to keep the ball rolling forward, if you want to put more people to work and enhance the economy and create more opportunity in this state, if you want to make people better in Wisconsin, the best way to do that to truly stimulate the economy isn't to keep more money in Madison. It's to put it in the hands of the hardworking taxpayers. The consumers and employers of this state are the ones who helped create this budget surplus. They're the ones who've earned it. It's time to give your money back to you, the taxpayers of Wisconsin, and that's exactly what we're doing. Now, let me warn you for a moment, though. Besides those that say that we should keep more of that money in general in Madison, there are going to be some, including some in the media, who are going to try and confuse you into saying, well, wait a minute, do we really have that kind of money? I think it's pretty obvious. We took a $3.6 billion budget deficit and turned it into the end of that 2 years budget cycle into a surplus. By any measure, if you look at the nonpartisan Legislative Fiscal Bureau, which Democrats and Republicans alike depend on, the budget that we're in right now ends with a surplus. A surplus. A surplus. Did I say it ends with a surplus? And then you hear some people throw around this word structural out there. Well, let me indulge you for a moment with a little math quiz or math lesson here. The budget we're in ends with a surplus. And so you go ahead to the next budget and you say, okay, are there commitments you have made that structurally you have to take care of unless you're going to abruptly make changes going forward? Well, sure, there always are. But that's assuming no revenue growth. When they talk about structural issues in the future, that's assuming there's zero revenue growth going into the next budget. Now, how many of you here planned next year's budget based on no increase in sales in your company? Anybody do that? I didn't think so. Now, most of you probably conservatively, if you did, you're kind of probably in trouble because your company's not aiming too high. But you're saying, okay, I'm going to look at conservative estimates where we're at. So say hypothetically, your company's been growing in the last 5-10 years at about 5%. You've seen revenue and sales go up. You're going to put together a budget that maybe says I'm going to be conservative, so I'll plan on 3.5%. And you're going to say to your sales team, I'm going to hit 7%. Right? You aim high. You look where your reasonable projections are, but you budget on a conservative basis, right? You don't do zero, but you say, I'm not going to go right where I was at. I'm going to aim higher, and in the end, I want to, be surprised and have more money left over. That's all we're doing. The structural commitments we made that you hear talked about in the paper and in the media are assuming zero revenue growth. Those numbers are about it's actually $807 million to be exact. To get there, that would require revenue growth of 1.8%. Let me put that in perspective for a second. If you look back over the past decade, a decade that, as I remember, includes years like 2008, 2009, 2010. What happened during those years? What happened? Let me see if you're still awake. What happened? What was going on during that time frame? Recession, right? And if you look at the beginning of that decade back, it seems like a long time ago, but what had just happened and we were still recovering from? 9/11. So arguably, in modern history, at least in our state, you have a decade back that includes some of the worst economic times our state has faced, some of the lowest revenue numbers because the economy was down and therefore revenue numbers were down. Do you know during the last decade, looking back, what the average annual revenue growth was during that time frame? 3.4%. If we hit that most conservative of conservative estimates, looking back on a decade that included not only a recession, but the end of a little bit, something like that, at the beginning of that decade past, if you look at that most conservative revenue estimate, we go into the next budget with $1.5 billion. That more than makes up for the structural commitments we've made, and it allows us to enter the next budget with a $700 million surplus going into the budget. And that's assuming conservative revenue growth. I'm aiming higher than that. I want to continue to fuel the economy, and my belief is firmly that if we take this surplus and overwhelmingly put it in the hands of the taxpayers, we'll not just have $700 or $800 million, we'll have many times more than that, because you will have taken the money we sent back and reinvested it in your companies, employing more people, raising the income of your employees, and those others who receive it as consumers are going to use it to fuel the economy. That's a winning message. That's a pro-growth message. But that's the difference here. You see, that's part of the discussion, not just in this town, but in our nation's capital. There's two very different views of the world. One measures success by how many people are dependent on the government, by how many people are on Medicaid and on food stamps and unemployment. That's their measure of success, by how many people they think they help with those programs. My measure of success is just the opposite. I want success to be how many fewer people are dependent on the government, not because we push them out into the cold, not because we push them to the curb, but because we understand that true freedom and prosperity doesn't come from the mighty hand of the government. It comes from the dignity that only comes from work. And for more people to work, we need a strong, mighty economy. You are the ones that are going to make that happen. If we put more money in your hands, you will help create more opportunities for those very people who today might be temporarily dependent on the government but don't need to be. We want to transition more people from government dependence to true independence. When we talk about an improving economy, it's not just about numbers, it's not just about businesses, it's about making sure that everyone in this state who wants to work can find a job. We improve everyone and we don't leave anyone behind. You are the ones making that possible. Help us share that message. Not just with others here today, not just with folks around the Capitol, but with your state senator and your state representative. Help us share that message with others in your industry and in your communities and at chambers all across the state at the local level. Help us spread that message, not just to pass our blueprint for prosperity, but more importantly, to pass the positive, enthusiastic message that Wisconsin is open for business, that we're back on the right track, and because of that, people all across this state will benefit for generations to come. Thank you so much for being here today. It's always good to be at Business Day. A lot of great employers, big and small alike, from across the state of Wisconsin. And for us, in many ways, it's kind of like a pep rally this year, talking about the good numbers with the economy, talking about unemployment down, employment up, personal income up, certainly all those things attributing to nearly $1 billion surplus, and wanting to see that continue. And we think the best way to do that, once we set about $100 million aside from the rainy day fund, which will make it literally 7 times bigger than it ever was before I took office, is to put the lion's share of the rest of that back into the hands of the taxpayers through property tax relief, income tax relief, and in particular through withholding changes, which will start effective April 1st, to put more money back in the paychecks of people all across the state. So some good news out there, hopefully good response for the employers that are here today, but we hope more than just getting applause in an event like this, they go out and see the investments we made in worker training and the other things we're doing to help grow the workforce and turn around and use that as an incentive to hire more people in the coming year.
Senator Ellis today is saying that he will likely support the tax cut bill that you push forward under an agreement with you and your office that would essentially raise the statutory balance and allow what was going to go into the rainy day fund to take care of some of the structural deficit. Have you agreed to that in principle, and if so, how do you come to that agreement?
What I've said all along, we've talked to Senator Ellis, I've talked to Senator Fitzgerald, I've talked to almost all of the Senate Republican caucus, and that's an idea that we kicked around with a couple of senators. For me, there's a number of different ways. As I've said the last couple of days, I'm willing to tweak this if we can do so in a way that doesn't take away from the fundamental relief we'll be providing property tax and income tax payers in this state. I'm willing to make other modifications. So it's one of those we're reaching out. I've talked to even today a couple of other senators, but we appreciate working with Senator Ellis and his interest, and we're hopeful that's something where we can get 17 senators in that body to go along with it.
Yeah, it sounds like Schultz is definitely out. I mean, does it put a lot of pressure on those other senators to basically agree to this?
Who knows? I mean, in the end, as we saw last October when we had the $100 million worth of property tax relief, we had a number of Democrats that voted for it, particularly in the Assembly. It's an election year. Who knows where things are at? So I don't think you can make any assumptions one way or the other. But from our standpoint, we're going to start with the premise that we need at least 17. And I think if we have a good package, which I think we do, it's interesting that it's a moving target, particularly for lawmakers on the other side of the aisle. Before the surplus numbers came out, they said, well, we want it in property tax relief, and we want to make sure that low-income people benefit from that. When I came out with my State of the State address, suddenly they said, well, wait a minute, now it's something different. I think the reality is that listening to people across the state, they overwhelmingly want property tax relief. They overwhelmingly want the economic recovery to not just be for some, but to be for all. And so we're trying to make sure we help the lowest income tax bracket, and they want to see more money back in their paychecks. And they want us to be prudent in how we do that. So whether it's the rainy day fund, or whether it's through a change in the balance so that we increase that, for us, we're willing to work with the legislature in a number of different options.
Would you be willing to put that whole $100 million that was going to go to the rainy day fund towards the deficit?
Sure. Certainly, if they wanted to put that in the balance. Again, my overriding principle is, as I've said before, every year I'm in office, I want to cut the tax burden. I think, as I mentioned in the crowd here today of employers, as I've said to taxpayers across the state, I think the best way to continue to fuel this economic recovery is to put the vast majority of the money in the surplus back in the hands of the taxpayers. I propose it through property tax relief, income tax relief, and withholding changes. But in terms of the smaller amount that we set aside for the rainy day fund, we're willing to work with lawmakers on other variations if that's what it takes to pass, because whether you do it through the balance, through the rainy day fund, or other ways, in the end, we're setting it aside for the future.
Governor, after your meeting yesterday with Speaker Voss and Senator Fitzgerald, is it your sense that there is still a rift amongst the Republican Party about how best to deal with the legislative aspect of getting this tax cut passed?
Oh, I think there are some issues that go far beyond my tax proposal, so I'll let them expound on that. But I think it's probably much greater than that. So I think it's less about the tax cut plan and more about other issues. But in the end, we're professionals. We're going to work with the legislature. We're going to help bring them together, hopefully in a way that can include not only the Assembly and the Senate getting together, but I'd like to be at a point, as I recall, I think Senator Carpenter, for example, said that he thought at least 25% of the tax relief should be for property taxpayers. Well, obviously much greater than that is in property tax relief. Senator Carpenter is one of those Democrats who in the past, when it's come to property tax issues, has been willing to cross party lines. I think in addition to getting 17 Republicans, I'd like to see a few Democrats if possible, but time will tell on that.
Did Senator Fitzgerald give you any notion of how many votes short he is of having the majority?
He's not even at a point of counting right now. As he said before, the day of the State of the State, he said, I'm repeating his words, but I think it's been reinforced to me that today he wouldn't have 17 votes for any plan out there. And so it's our goal. It's why I personally, in addition to, I've been meeting for weeks with Senator Fitzgerald and with the Speaker, as has my staff. So we've been talking for a while, but I've taken the next step where I've called through and either called or met with senators in his caucus over the past week or so, and I'll continue to do so. I'm willing to reach out and to listen to what concerns people have. and find a way that doesn't fundamentally compromise the tax relief we want to provide to the hardworking families in the state and senior citizens in the state. And if we can do that, I think we can reach an agreement.
It seemed like Senator Fitzgerald's gripe was about procedure. How does that strike you? You came from that area of the government. What did you think about the strategy?
In the end, I didn't ask the Assembly or the Senate to do anything other than to consider my proposal. I didn't ask for a specific timeline or anything else like that. I'll leave them to explain what they might like or dislike about that process. All we're asking for is before they leave, which is the not too distant future, that they give me a bill that I can sign that provides tax relief for property taxpayers, for low-income income taxpayers, and we'll take care of the withholding. And in terms of how we get there, again, we think there's enough room for some tweaks to get there. I'm willing to work with them. And the nice thing is we're on good terms with both the Assembly and the Senate. I don't feel any of the animosity that some of you have talked about between the houses. I think we're on good terms with both my friends, the Speaker and the Majority Leader in the Senate, as well as their individual members. And so we're going to continue to be that bridge.
Governor, there was a study that came out from the Forward Institute today about charter schools versus public schools and MPS, saying that based on their study, charter schools must be skimming students with lower truancy rates, higher economic income rates, and that's why their scores are better. Do you think there's any truth to that, or do you think that you're skeptical of any study that would say that?
I haven't looked at the details of that. What I've said all along is I'm not an advocate for one school concept over another. I've been a great advocate for charter schools in some instances, for expanding the choice school options out there, for even homeschool environment. But the overwhelming majority of kids are going to do what my two sons did, and that is go to a traditional public school. My nieces still go to a traditional public school. I want the public schools in the state to work. And so my number one objective is to make sure that we have exceptional schools, that we replicate the ones that are successful no matter what format they might be in, and that we find a way to hold accountable the ones that aren't. And so I'm going to continue to push for as much accountability as we can have in all forms of schools out there, so that we weed out the difference between those that are exceptional and those that are failing to live up to our expectation.
Last question.
About a month ago, you were asked about some of the brewing controversy in New Jersey with Governor Chris Christie. Said you didn't know enough about it at the time. A month later, and there's more and more calls, it seems, for him to maybe step aside from the RGA while this is going on. What's your view on that? Do you think he should, or do you still support him, given everything that's happening?
As I mentioned before, I talked to him the day of his almost 2-hour press conference. He told me in private essentially the same thing that he said to the press in New Jersey for almost 2 hours. I have every reason to believe him. I've yet to see anything that validates anything other than what he said. Obviously, if that were to change, I'd have to review that. But as long as what he said remains intact, I continue to support Governor Christie, both in his role as governor and his leadership position this year at the RGA. And would just stress that many governors, Democrat and Republican alike, have challenges sometimes with the people that have worked with them. And to me, one of the tests of leadership is what you do in situations like that. He held people accountable. He was transparent. He talked about what happened, what he did to rectify that. And I think that's a sign of good leadership. And again, as long as the facts remain as we've all seen thus far, not what's been speculated on, but what we've actually seen, I have every reason to believe he's accurate, and we'll continue to support him.
Governor, on that topic, there's a school of thought that's emerging. I think there was a Politico headline this week that said Governor Christie's pain is Governor Walker's gain. Are you getting a sense from Republican donors and so forth that you're the guy that they want to support if Christie is injured by this political scandal?
I've heard of late a lot of buzz about that. My answer to donors is the same I say to you, and that is that those of us who care not only about the Republican Party but about this country should focus on 2014, not just because I'm up, but because there's unique opportunity for Republicans not only to hold the House but regain the United States Senate. And I think it's a disservice for anyone in our party to talk about anything except 2014.
Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks.